Hey, you are listening to The Brown Perspective. This is Herreo, and I'm here with Eduardo. How are we doing today?
Dímelo, activados, listo.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about this article that I came across today. Hispanic women no longer account for the majority of immigrant births in the US. And
Uh-oh.
a few months ago, we had a discussion about this sentiment amongst the nationalists, the alt-right, that they felt that they were being replaced, especially with immigrants and Hispanics. And so now here you have this data that says that both foreign born and US born Hispanic women have experienced drops in the birth rate. And here you can see it says since 2000, the number of births per 1,000 Hispanic immigrant women of childbearing age fell 25% from 109.7 to 82.3 in 2017. That's the most recent year where they have data available. And so the birth rate of Hispanic immigrant women, which used to be far higher than the rates of all non-Hispanic immigrant groups, is now lower than that of white immigrant women, though it remains higher than Black and Asian immigrants. So I think this data that we're seeing here, which is already 4 years old, it spans a lot of the different conversations that we've been having. For example, if one is the growing level of education among Hispanics, but also the economic situation that a lot of people are facing in this country and how that is now being reflected in the birth rate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in part it is a reflection of of these women, these Latina women, whether they're born here or come here at a younger age during their childbearing years. I think it's also a fact that, you come to the US as an industrialized nation. You have to work hard to make it out here. So they're probably having kids later in life, or they decide to have fewer kids, right? Because they realize, okay, if I have one or two kids, at least I can try to provide for them instead of having, back in the day where families had to have, not have to, but they had 7 to 8 kids. And in part, it was because they all had to work and chip in and help the family make it through. So I'm sure that there's a number of factors. And I think also the fact that maybe there's just more access and education around women's reproductive rights. And obviously that's being challenged right now. So it'll be interesting to see how this trend may impact the recent curtailing of women's reproductive rights in certain parts of the country.
And right, and the other variable that I'd be interested in looking at is what are the birth rates in a country like Mexico? Because they've all I would guess that they've also decreased. Like, let's say, for example, and obviously I'm not going to extrapolate what happens in my small town to all of Mexico, but the small town where I came from, this is a farming community where um, 30, 40 years ago, families were still having 5 or 7 kids, and because labor intensive work, and you need a lot of hands to help you in the fields. And so yeah, so that was the reality back then. But now, if I go back and I look at those relatives or friends of my age, they're also just having, say, 2 kids, maybe three. There's not that many families with 4 or 5 kids. So this might be a global trend as well, or maybe a trend in Latin America. But what I took from this, at least what I think is one of the biggest factors, is probably that this is related to like the stage of capitalism in which the United States finds itself in. Because think back on the all the stories that we heard about the United States when we were growing up, and being able to fulfill your dreams and come out here, live the American dream, and work hard, and you'll be able to make it. You'll be able to buy your home and support your family, and those things were true up until maybe even the 80s and the 90s. Maybe our generation is probably the last one that really experienced that. But now what you have is the recent immigrants. Even if they come here and they get married, you have both of them that have to join the workforce to make ends meet. And so it becomes really expensive even for recent immigrants to be able to afford living in this country. It's not like they can have just a single partner in the household working and somebody else, usually the woman, staying at home taking care of the kids. And that's why I think, at least from what I see from this chart here, is that you see all of the groups converging at around the same rate, whether it's foreign born or US born. And that's more a reflection of the, again, the economic, the stage of capitalism that the US finds itself in. And the quality of life has decreased. And I think we're seeing it reflected in these numbers.
Perhaps the quality of life in other parts of the world have increased as well somewhat. I know that there's still a big gap between the industrialized countries and those who are still developing. But I also think that there may be other factors. I know fertility is an issue that has always been there with us, but I think maybe there's some environmental factors that are impacting women's and people's ability to have, and men as well, ability to have kids. I think also people who may be making conscious decisions about the state of the world and everything that we hear about in terms of climate change, wars, famine, political unrest, and things like that. So maybe perhaps people are making a conscious decisions not to have as many kids, or maybe wait until they're in a better position. So I think it could also be a number of other factors that are contributing to this decline. And at the same time, one of the important reasons why immigration is so important, right? Because I think it's just the natural, similar to how, Italian families when they got here, German families, Irish families when they first got here, they had many kids, but then obviously as they become more acculturated, there's other cultural, and you're right, maybe the capitalist model comes into play. Like I'd rather have a kid or two with whom I can just invest my resources and worry about, because kids are expensive, versus let me just have as many kids as we're able to have and struggle with it.
Right. And I those two other factors that you mentioned, I think we can tie them to capitalism as well, because one of them was couples delaying having kids till they're older. And why does that happen? Well, that happens because unfortunately in our country, a lot of women are forced to choose between their careers and a family. And they know that if they start a family early enough, then that's going to affect their chances of becoming successful later on in life, or at least rising in corporate America. And
Hmm.
so if you had the opportunity to have kids in your mid 20s and you knew that that wasn't going to impact your career in any way, or maybe you didn't even need to have a career, maybe one income would be enough, then you would still see people having kids at a younger age. And the other one regarding fertility, well, I think the jury is still out on this one. We don't really know what is impacting it, but it's probably also linked to the degradation and quality of a lot of the things that we expose ourselves to. So what does
For
capitalism
sure.
do? It exploits everything so that you try to maximize output from the farmland. So you use more pesticides, you use more herbicides, you don't prioritize organic food. Companies will pollute as much as they can until they're caught, and so they don't have any qualms about polluting their environment. We don't have any issues with cutting down the trees. We don't really care much about how many hormones we give to the chickens, which are then being eaten by people. So it's just like, it's like a vicious cycle. And because capitalism pretty much exploits everything, because it says you want to maximize profits, and unless you have really good regulation to prevent those companies from really maximizing those profits to the extreme, they'll sacrifice anything. And I think as a country, we've sacrificed our general health. And that must also be playing a role to the extent that we are having an issue with fertility. Because I would have to go back and look at the numbers to see what the decline rate is, and then see what they're potentially linking it to. But having all of the deterioration of our surroundings, of our environment, can't help with that.
for sure. And I mean, there's also the stress of making it
Yeah.
in this type of economy.
Yep.
I think also student loans, student debt. So that's why Un Uncle Biden's loan forgiveness may incite a little bit more baby making in the months to come.
I don't know, and I think it's if kids graduating college are worried about just finding a job and having to get a roommate or two or three roommates just to be able to afford the rent, I think the last thing on their minds is starting a family. So you have what the average age of people starting families now is over 30. I wouldn't be
Hmm.
surprised if that's the case. But let me read to you this other part that the article mentioned because I'm not really sure what to make of this. A key factor driving down U.S. birth rates among Hispanic immigrant women has been the 37% decline in rates among women born in Mexico, from 131.8 in 2000 to 83.0 in 2017. The birth rate among Asian immigrant women declined much more modestly during the same period, from 71 to 67 births per 1,000 women, while rates for white and black immigrant women ticked up. So it's saying here that women that are not from Mexico but are Hispanic on average have fewer kids than Mexicans. And I'm not really sure. I'd have to look at the data to see what numbers they're looking at because all of Latin America is predominantly Catholic. And as far as I'm aware, I didn't know that, or as far as I've known, women from Central America and South America have around the same kids as Mexicans, or is that completely different?
I think we would have to look at the data, but I think that assumption sounds right. But I think the other factor here, and I know we covered this in the conversation that we had about also the increase in access to contraceptives, and I think overall women's empowerment, reproductive empowerment in parts of Latin America, where again, I remember that growing up well, here in the United States and also in Latin America, if you didn't have a kid before you turned 20, it was almost like you were the anomaly, right? And now, and part of it was because it was normal to have kids when you were a teenager. And and if you didn't have them, like, oh my God, you're not gonna have kids. You're a solterona at 21 or a solterona at 21. And then I think things have changed. Again, women have a little bit, a lot more say and ability to decide when they have kids and when they don't. And maybe the other part of it is sort of when they feel they have the right partner or whether reached a right place in their lives where they can have kids. And again, to your earlier comments, that time may take a lot longer because may take longer to complete school, to feel that you're financially secure, to have a child, and then to be
Hmm.
able to provide for them.
Exactly, yeah. And so to all of the nationalists out there, the alt right, thinking that they're being replaced, well, here's your proof that there's no plan, right? The birth rate amongst Hispanics has increased, is now the same as white. So now, if this isn't if this doesn't make it obvious that we're all on the same boat here, then I don't know what will, because that here to me is clear indication that it's more about the, again, the, as we've been saying, it's the economic system under which we live that generates these trends and or these behaviors in people too, that modifies them. And paradoxically, the thing with capitalism is that it assumes infinite growth even in population. So you have all of these programs that are set up that are dependent on a new wave of people being born so that they can pay into the tax system so that we can then support the later generation. So then we need the immigrants. We need people that are coming in if the population growth is going to, well, it's not really flatlining here, but I think, or at least this chart doesn't show it flatlining, but the United States already had a net negative population growth if you took out Hispanics, because between black and white and obviously Asians is lower, but if you just considered white Americans, it's a negative population growth, or very close to zero or negative. And since Hispanics are going there, then that means the United States the population growth is gonna flatline. So then you're gonna need more immigrants, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge that economies like in Japan, where they have an older population and not enough young people to to have kids to maintain
Yeah.
to help with the older generations and all those things. So I think that yes, I mean there's a reason why the US has had the number one economy, because all those immigrants, all those people who come here and risk their lives, all those people who are now at the border trying to get in, uh, not only bring themselves and their desire to succeed, they bring their kids.
Hmm.
They tend to be younger because it takes a lot to be able to make that trip. And perhaps if given a chance, they will have the opportunity to have more kids here. And again, just that normal contribution to the growth of both the population and the economy, which is essential.
Hmm. But the Japanese are just going to open up their borders and let the Chinese in. That's how they're going to solve the
Hmm.
problem. Nah,
Yeah.
not really. That's not going to happen.
Well, even
uh,
China, right? I know at one point they were trying to control.
yeah, China has a big problem too with their aging population. But here's the other thing though, at least when it comes to China and also maybe Japan, you got to factor in automation, because automation will, right, if it's going to displace a whole bunch of workers, then it's also going to assume or make things more productive in other sectors. So then I think we still have to factor that variable into to countries like even the US. So maybe it's not fair to say that we still need the population to keep increasing, because maybe in the next 20 years automation is going to offset that a bit. But that's yet to be determined. We don't know. We don't know if we have a major war in the next 5 or 10 years, and that sets us back uh, as a country, or it sets back multiple countries decades, right? So hard to predict these things, as I don't like to make any predictions.
I know the fact that a lot of communities of color, Hispanics, Blacks, Asians were really impacted by the pandemic. So I know that that has also contributed to the overall population growth. And then we didn't even
The
talk
reduction,
about
you
some
mean?
of the, huh?
You mean the decrease in population growth?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, actually, death in terms of,
yeah.
since these folks were the ones that were actually working and keeping the economy going while those of us who could work from home did. And
Although,
then there's the also, we didn't talk about it, but I know that there's the impact of how racism impacts women as they try to have kids, and the type of access that they may or may not get, right? In terms of, I
I
know there's growing awareness about how the different ways that Black mothers are treated, and I'm sure that poor Latina women are also not treated, not provided with the access, particularly a lot of those immigrant women who may be working, who may be undocumented, who don't have access to the right
but
type
that
of natal care.
but any effect that would have had, we would have already seen it, right? Because the country is trending towards less racism. So you would have seen more of that in the 70s or 80s. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not sure how you would be able to measure that, because racism has been a constant, and if anything, I do think it's decreasing. Or you could maybe make the case that maybe there was more racism back then, but we didn't have social media, so it wasn't in the forefront. So now with social media, people experience it at a whole different level, because any racist act that happens gets amplified, and now everyone hears about it. So I mean, that could be a fact. I'm not sure, but it's just wanted to throw
Yeah,
that
I mean,
out
it could
there.
be that more people, or more of those stories are now gaining
Yeah,
attention. It's being studied. there's more black academics and academics of color who are studying
Mm-hmm.
that as well. So I think that there's just more awareness tied to social media and just broader access to education and other things.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is this data is from 2017, so it won't reflect any of the COVID numbers. But when we do get that data, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to these trends. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for the conversation. If you all out there enjoy our content, be sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. Nos vemos.
Ciao.